Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Monday, September 20th. This is Africa 54.
Guinea's ruling junta remains defiant in refusing to allow President Alpha Conde to leave the country. World leaders gather in New York for the United Nations General Assembly against a COVID-19 backdrop. And with the U.S. full withdrawal from Afghanistan complete, new questions are raised about what to do with terror suspects still detained at Guantanamo Bay.
We begin in West Africa, where Guinea's junta says they will not bow to pressure from West African leaders to allow ousted President Alpha Conde to leave the country. David Doyle has more.
Dozens of Guineans protested against sanctions leveled against their country as two West African presidents arrived for talks with coup leaders on Friday. One sign says ECOWAS, that's West Africa's main regional bloc, doesn't decide for us. But it wasn't only outside the airport in the capital Conakry where defiance was on show. Guinea's military junta, which seized power 2 weeks ago, said on Friday that it would not bow to regional demands and allow ousted President Alpha Conde to leave the country. On Thursday, ECOWAS agreed to freeze the financial assets of the junta and their relatives and bar them from travelling. The next day, Presidents Alassane Ouattara of Ivory Coast and Ghana's Nana Akufo-Addo arrived in Guinea. They were asking for Conde's release. But on state television, the junta said, the former president is and remains in Guinea. We will not yield to any pressure. After talks with coup leader Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, Akufo-Addo said they had held honest, brotherly meetings, and that he was confident Guinea and ECOWAS would find a way to walk together.
David Doyle, Reuters filed that report. A Rwandan court on Monday found Paul Rusesabagina, a one-time hotel manager portrayed as a hero in Hollywood film about the 1994 genocide, guilty of being part of a group responsible for terrorist attacks, and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. Prosecutors had sought a life sentence on 9 charges, including terrorism, arson, taking hostages, and forming an armed rebel group, which he directed from abroad. After the announcement of the initial verdict, one of the defendants became ill, causing a short recess which delayed verdicts on other charges and sentencing. Rusesabagina, 67, was arrested last year on arrival from Dubai after what he described as a kidnapping by Rwandan authorities. Since being portrayed by actor Dan Chido as the hero of the 2004 film Hotel Rwanda, Rusesabagina emerged as a prominent critic of President Paul Kagame. He has denied all the charges against Rusesabagina has denied all the charges against him. And his supporters called the trial a sham and proof of Kagame's ruthless treatment of political opponents. Former Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, ousted in 2019 after mass protest, was given a state funeral on Sunday that was attended by senior officials but received little of the attention given to such occasions in the past. Bouteflika died Friday at age 84. An armored vehicle dressed with flowers pulled his coffin covered with the national flag on a gun carriage from his home in Zeralda, west of the capital, to the El Alia cemetery in Algiers, where 5 of his predecessors are buried. Bouteflika was first elected in 1999 and is widely credited with the national reconciliation policy that restored peace after a war with armed Islamists in the 1990s killed an estimated 200,000 people. But many Algerians blame him for the country's economic stagnation during his latter years in power. New York next week is undertaking one of its first large gatherings since the coronavirus pandemic, when more than 100 world leaders are expected to return to the United Nations for their annual meetings. VOA's United Nations correspondent Margaret Bashir reports.
A scaled-back version of the annual United Nations General Assembly is planned. World leaders have the option of attending in person with a very small delegation or sending a video message. Some 125 leaders are expected in New York, where officials will take on pressing issues.
Our world is edging towards a new abnormal, more chaotic, more insecure, more dangerous for everyone. We are moving in the wrong direction, and we are at a pivotal moment.
The week will begin with talks on climate action. Guterres and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will meet with a few dozen other leaders. Their goal is to encourage more ambitious commitments to slow global warming and fund adaptation and mitigation efforts ahead of a key climate conference 6 weeks from now in Scotland.
We really are out of time. We must act now to prevent further irreversible damage.
Halting the COVID-19 pandemic through global vaccination is the other urgent priority. The World Health Organization has set mid-2022 as its target for 70% of the world's population to be vaccinated. But poorer countries are not on track to reach this. On Wednesday, U.S. President Joe Biden will convene a virtual meeting on ways to curb the spread of the virus.
President Biden is committed to leading in concert with our allies and partners across the globe to stop the COVID-19 pandemic. We are building a coalition of governments, businesses, international institutions, and civil society to expand vaccine production, accelerate access to vaccines and life-saving treatment, and strengthen health systems around the globe.
But overshadowing these twin global crises is the latest geopolitical one, Afghanistan.
Afghanistan represents an enormous humanitarian challenge for the United Nations. And it's going to be UN agencies who are responsible for keeping Afghans alive during a period of hunger and political chaos.
G20 ministers meet Wednesday to discuss developments in Afghanistan. World leaders are also expected to address the issue during one-on-one talks. The Taliban's takeover is likely to figure prominently in Western leaders' speeches during the general debate, especially on the need to protect progress made on the rights of women and girls.
There's not very much the General Assembly can do to force the Taliban to protect those rights.
Starting Tuesday, leaders will address the General Assembly. One of the most anticipated statements will be from President Biden, who will address the General Assembly for the first time.
President Biden will speak to our top priorities: ending the COVID-19 pandemic, combating climate change, the climate crisis, and defending human rights, democracy, and the international rules-based order. All three are challenges that stretch across borders. They involve every single country on Earth.
With only a week to cover many pressing issues, leaders will have little time to enjoy New York City, which has begun to reopen its museums, restaurants, and Broadway theaters.
For more insight on the happenings at the annual UN General Assembly in New York, we are joined live from the United Nations by VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir. Hello, Margaret.
Hi, Esther. Good to be back with you.
Yes, there's so much talk about climate change around the globe. What should we expect to hear from leaders at the UNGA?
Well, as you heard in the package, the meetings kicked off today with the big climate meeting with Boris Johnson and the Secretary General of the United Nations, and they just spoke to us a few minutes ago after the conclusion of that. The Secretary General said, well, first of all, I should tell you, there's this big climate conference coming up in November in Scotland. It's called COP26, and it will review the Paris Climate Accord, which was agreed in 2015. It's a big review conference to see where we're at, a big checkup. And we're not in a good place, apparently. The goal is to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. But we're headed towards 2.7 degree, which is way above where we need to be. And if that happens, we're going to continue to see these horrible weather events we've been seeing around the world, droughts and floods and fires and all sorts of problems. So the Secretary General has growing concerns about getting the funding that's needed to slow global warming, particularly in developing countries. So it's an issue of the developed world, the G20 countries, need to put up about $100 billion a year between now and 2025 each year in order to slow global warming and to fund measures to help other countries adapt to it. And those are primarily developing countries, particularly in Africa and in the Pacific. The islands are suffering quite a bit from rising oceans and such. So the Secretary General said today he feels that we've been falling short of this 100 billion goal so far, but he thinks it's within reach. He's hopeful for action on that in November. But where he's particularly concerned is on greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And the G20 countries are responsible for about 80% of those emissions. And he said they need to be cut. We have 10 years to do it. Yeah. If not, we're in big trouble.
Right, Margaret, quite a polarizing issue on climate change, but briefly, what's on tap for tomorrow?
For tomorrow, the leaders start their speeches. We're going to hear from President Joe Biden in his debut here at the UN as U.S. president. We're going to hear from the new Iranian president in a video speech. The president of the Democratic Republic of Congo is going to be here to deliver his speech. So we have a big lineup of leaders tomorrow, and I think we're going to hear a lot of messages about issues of concern, particularly COVID-19 and climate change.
Definitely, Margaret. As always, thank you so much. VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir reporting live from New York. Please join Africa 54 again on Tuesday when Margaret brings us another live report from the United Nations. The 76th session of the UN General Assembly is underway, and city officials and residents are preparing for the commotion it might bring, along with fears of an increased risk of COVID-19 spread. VOA's Tina Trin reports.
The 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly is officially underway, and delegates have returned to UN headquarters in New York City for in-person meetings, with many more expected in the coming days.
We have about 90 heads of state, head of government, that the Secret Service will be protecting, in addition to approximately 40 spouses. So for us, we're in a range of about 130 protectees that are going to be within the city of New York.
The convergence of world leaders will mean an increased security presence, along with blocked roads and checkpoints.
I think it goes without saying there will be some traffic closures and street closures. There will be impact, undoubtedly, but the goal is really to minimize that.
For local residents, routine errands will likely become logistically challenging.
You know, if you go shopping, you need your ID to come back home.
The threat of COVID-19 adds another layer of complication to security efforts. And in the city that once was the epicenter of the pandemic, locals have mixed feelings about this year's massive gathering.
I'm hoping that everybody is vaccinated.
We'll see people again, and the vitality and the economy that needs to be revitalized will be here. But then again, to know that we really might see another surge come, it's very, very, very troubling.
The city says it'll ask all delegates to show proof of vaccination before entering the General Assembly Hall. But UN officials stress they can't ban heads of state from entering UN headquarters, which is international territory, if they're not vaccinated.
We need to balance the need to have world leaders here, have officials who can talk to each other and interact with each other, and balance that against the need to keep social distancing and keep all the preparations in place to deal with COVID-19.
New York City officials are also partnering with the UN to mitigate the threat of COVID-related disruptions.
The city is providing a mobile unit, a mobile van that will provide testing and vaccinations free of cost to all attendees this year.
Given the high-level discussions due to take place, many are hoping to return to in-person interactions after last year's UN General Assembly was almost entirely virtual. With the stage for international diplomacy set, the convergence of world leaders and all the disruption that brings is also a bid for a degree of normalcy. Tina Trin, VOA News, New York.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, China has new rules for minors playing online games. Plus, here's Haiti Adams to tell us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we'll take a look at terrorism hotspots on the continent and discuss what's at stake. We will look at how young people are being recruited by terrorist organizations and what governments can do to stop it. Join me, Haiti Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Haitian migrants who were deported Sunday to Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, aboard 3 U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement flights criticized the way they were deported and their treatment during detention. They didn't let us take any of our belongings. It was like being in jail. No food, nothing. Dieudonne Kassan told VOA. A woman who declined to give her name says she had been living well in Chile but did not have legal residency, prompting her to leave. She told VOA Haitians were treated differently than other migrants during detention.
Migrants attempting or considering making the journey to our border should know that we are still enforcing CDC Title 42 order and that they will not be allowed to enter the United States. They will be removed and they will be sent back to their country of origin as mandated under our current law.
Ortiz says the measure aims at deterring more migrants from coming into the region, while U.S. authorities are trying to manage the migrants under the bridge in Del Rio, Texas. Meanwhile, ICE is preparing more deportation flights to Haiti on Monday. Jean-Nego Barna-Delva, head of Haiti's Migration Office, told VOA the migrants' names will be put into a registry along with their contact information so that National Office of Migration employees can follow up with them. Barna-Delva also says they will be given money to restart their lives in Haiti. News of the deportation has angered Haitians who took to social media to express their disappointment with the White House. The Justice for J6 rally took place Saturday near the U.S. Capitol. Law enforcement officials worried about violence similar to what occurred in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. VOA's Caroline Presutti shows us the massive police presence designed to keep protesters and counter-protesters apart.
They were ready. Police en masse, Capitol Police, Washington, D.C. Police, County Police from nearby Virginia, some in riot gear for this.
And may they have the rights that they are guaranteed under our constitutions.
Get proof through the night.
The rally was in support of those arrested in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. 8 months ago, hundreds of people stormed the Capitol.
We can't breathe.
Most of them supporters of former President Donald Trump. 5 people died from the day's events. At least 600 were arrested. About 40 remain in jail in Washington, D.C.
I'm calling for fair treatment, and they have not received fair treatment.
Can we get them out? Or are they just locked up there until somebody says, hey, we got to let these folks out?
Police were worried about counter-protesters a kilometer away clashing with this group. But the counter-protesters were already in the crowd.
Don't break into Congress and try to overthrow the country. It's quite that police officer. Lies. Yeah, that police officer's a hero.
But as soon as you cross the line of irresponsibility, that right is not there anymore.
Well,
you have committed a crime.
Let me answer this question. Irresponsibility, a poor judgment, in which there were absolutely people who did that. Does that mean that the rights that they have should be denied?
Rally organizer Matt Brainerd, a former Trump campaign aide, called those still in jail political prisoners.
This is about justice and disparate treatment and equal treatment under the law.
They threaten the lives of lawmakers. They threaten the lives of law enforcement people protecting those lawmakers. They threaten the United States government. Those aren't political prisoners, those are criminals.
A U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee is investigating the January breach of the Capitol. 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans have requested records from several federal agencies, including the Trump White House.
There was no riot, there was no insurrection, except that which happened on the part of the left.
VOA asked D.C. Metropolitan Police Chief Robert Conte how he deals with a rally in support of the people his officers arrested.
People come in and protest for things all the time. We're just here to make sure that they're able to do it freely, do it peacefully, and that we have no issues.
A few were arrested with weapons or on outstanding warrants, but otherwise the rally was peaceful, with both sides still embracing their own beliefs. Carolyn Persutti, VOA News at the U.S. Capitol.
The U.S. ended its longest-running foreign war with a full withdrawal of its troops in Afghanistan on August 31st. But several challenges remain, including what to do with terror suspects still detained in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. VOA's Eunice Salim explores in this report narrated by Nova Pawadi.
January 2002. Months after the attacks of September 11th, the first detainees related to the war on terror were brought to the U.S. detention camp at Guantanamo Bay after being captured in Afghanistan or elsewhere around the world.
It has been necessary to move these individuals to an environment where they can be held secretly, questioned by experts, and when appropriate, prosecuted for terrorist acts.
The prison, situated at a U.S. naval base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, was one way to give counter-terrorism experts more leeway in their questioning. According to Chris Garrity, a research fellow at the Bridge Initiative at Georgetown University.
The individuals who are imprisoned there are not subject to U.S. law. And also, despite plenty of international law around the status of prisoners of war, the U.S. is really, they've developed their own categories, such as enemy combatants.
George W. Bush's successor, Barack Obama, pledged to close the controversial detention camp, but failed to do so during his 2 terms as president. And now President Joe Biden has launched a review of the detention center with a goal of closing it before the end of his term. Biden faces the same obstacles as Obama, his Democratic predecessor, according to constitutional law expert Jonathan Hafetz.
I think the problem is that there are a number of restrictions on closing Guantanamo right now. The restrictions on bringing prisoners to trial, to the United States for trial. There are restrictions on transferring prisoners to other countries. So I think it's important to eliminate those roadblocks.
Resistance from Republicans in the U.S. Congress is another key factor, says Matthew Ho, a former U.S. diplomat and a Marine combat veteran with the Center for International Policy. He believes criticism of the nation's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan will make Biden reluctant to look soft on terrorism, especially after several former Guantanamo detainees showed up in the new Taliban government.
I think that the heat that Joe Biden has taken, the catastrophic nature for the Americans of the collapse of the Afghan government, the scenes at the Kabul airport, all of that are going to contribute to Joe Biden being much more hawkish and conservative in any future decisions regarding these wars, and to include Guantanamo Bay. One of the men, as many people saw, the photos and videos coming from the presidential palace in Kabul, where Taliban were sitting, in the office of the president and things like that, right? The conquering heroes, that's what's going to happen. One of those men had been a detainee, a prisoner at Guantanamo Bay.
There are now just 39 detainees at Guantanamo, some of whom are only now being brought to trial 2 decades after 9/11. For Eunice Salim at Camp Justice, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Nova Pawadi, VOA News.
China has new rules for minors playing online games, and the global gaming industry is wondering what's next. VOA's Michelle Quinn has more.
Playing video games for only 3 hours a week. That's the new rule in China
for players 17 years old and younger. The global gaming industry is wondering what the long-term impact of these restrictions will be.
It's just been someone really yanked back on the reins, and we're waiting to see what happens when the horse starts to go.
For years, the Chinese government has worked to counter the influence of gaming on young people. Now, with the new rules, young gamers can play for 1 hour, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, 8 p.m. to 9 p.m.
So I think the government is saying, we were not kidding. We want our kids to stop playing games all the time.
In China, teenagers recently talked to Agence France-Presse about the new rules.
It's like there's a fight between two thoughts in my head. One says, this regulation not allowing me to play games is so annoying. And the other says, you are in your last year of high school. You should be studying. This is a good regulation. I feel conflicted.
Some of my classmates may use their parents' ID to register for the games or buy a game account without restrictions, which isn't too expensive anyways.
Gaming companies, not parents, enforce the rules. Tencent, the Shenzhen-based maker of Honor of Kings and League of Legends, is using facial recognition technology dubbed Midnight Patrol, which reportedly flags players who might be young and playing after curfew. If they don't check in with their Face ID, they are blocked from the game. James Steyer, who has long advocated for more education about the effects of gaming, sees an opportunity in the new China gaming rules.
And I think it's the source of very positive, healthy discussion about how to find a healthy media diet, the right balance for your children and teenagers, and quite honestly, for yourself.
Many young players hoping to compete in esports, global competitive online gaming tournaments, won't be able to put in the time to hone their skills, says Warren Hong, 26, a gamer from Oakland, California. He started playing at 11 and got more serious as a teenager, traveling to compete.
It's going to be a big hit for a lot of up-and-coming Chinese gamers. If they really want to play these games, they're only going to get to play 1 game a day, 3 games a week. And that's just going to be really tough because you're going to have to compete with people who are playing like 8 hours a day, every single day. And then it's going to be really hard to keep up with them.
In the short term, Hansen says the new rules in China might not affect gaming companies' bottom line. But the long-term forecast for the industry will likely change. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.